Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome back for another Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get you set up with another 5 Great Tales. Today, we're doing a little home renovation, so I hope you're ready for 5 strange tales about what you might find while fixing up a house. Let's start off with a tale about something that lives in the foundation, something below the floors. Let's hear a story about what lies beneath the floorboards. I hated the summer house. That's a weird thing to say, I know, but it's true. I would stay there for at least a week every year, and sometimes we would go up there for holidays. One year we spent Christmas at the cabin, and that was a miserable time indeed. The cabin, my family's summer home, sat on the edge of Lake Erie, and it was a modest 2-bedroom cabin with a loft in the eaves. It had a little kitchen, a nice living room with a fireplace, and 2 bedrooms downstairs, one for my sisters and one for me. Mom and Dad always slept in the loft, so they never saw any of the weirdness that I saw from my bed in the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. The floor of the cabin had these wide gaps between the floorboards, and it let you see the underside of the cabin. Dad always promised us that he would replace the floorboards, but he never did. They were old wood, smooth, and not prone to splinters, and I guess Dad thought it was worth the occasional spider or bug coming up through the floorboards if his socks didn't get hung on the poking wood. Bugs and spiders and other kind of pests were the least of my concern, though. I didn't notice it right away, of course. The first time we stayed there, I was just amazed by the cabin. It was so cool, having a cabin all to ourselves, and I explored every room and every inch before going outside. We swam in the lake, we took our canoes out, I climbed trees and played pretend for hours. And after dinner, I fell into a deep sleep. I'm not even sure that I dreamed that first night, and I couldn't wait to do it all again the next day. As that week went on, however, I started to notice the strange noises that wafted up from beneath the floorboards. It sounded like something moving around down there, a scuffling sound that made me think of small animals or bugs. I could sometimes catch glimpses of them between the gaps in the floorboards, but they were always too quick for me to see. Dad said it was probably just rats, and that most of these old cabins had rodents living under the floorboards. He put down traps in the kitchen, not wanting to bother them if they were living under the house. The traps never caught anything, though, and Dad just kind of shrugged it off as well-behaved pests. They were well-behaved for everyone, but me, it seemed. I never felt like I did the first night again, and that scuffling beneath the boards would sometimes keep me awake all night. I would lay there, listening to them moving around, and think to myself that they sounded way too big to be mice. If they were rats, then they were big rats, and I sometimes worried that they would try to come up through the floorboards. We always had fun while we were there, but I spent my nights praying that I could get to sleep before the scrabbling noises could keep me awake. My parents bought the house when I was 4, and we went there every year until I was 12. I had a lot of time to listen and a lot of time to investigate the noises, as well as a lot of time to lie awake and be scared. When I was 10, we stayed there for 2 weeks after a storm knocked out the power at our house. Knocked out the power for the whole area, actually. The flooding caused the grid to go down, and my parents decided to stay there until things returned to normal. It was miserable. Every night I just lay there, listening to the scrabbling of whatever was under there. No matter how many pillows I put on my head, no matter how much I swam and ran and wore myself out, no matter what I did to fall asleep, it never did any good. The scratching and the scrabbling would always keep me awake, and after 8 nights straight of this, I'd had enough. It was 11 o'clock, and I growled as the scratching started again. I was tired, I was grumpy, and I had had enough. push myself out of bed, coming down hard on the boards before stomping around as loud as I dared, hoping to scare them. I'd been stomping around for a couple of minutes when suddenly the noise under my feet stopped. I stood there, feeling pleased with myself as I crawled back into bed. If I'd known it would be that easy, I would have done it weeks ago. As I closed my eyes and finally dropped into something like sleep, I felt secure here for the first time since that first night. But it was short-lived. When I heard the scrabbling again, I realized it had barely been an hour. The sound was so loud that it made me think that something was trying to come through the floor. I peeked over the side of the bed and saw something pressing against the cracks. It was dark, so it was hard to tell, but through the floor cracks, I thought I saw fingers digging up through the holes in the wood. The fingers were dirty, the wood making them run with dark liquid as it cut them. But they kept pushing. I was frozen in fear, my 10-year-old mind not sure what to do, but as the floorboards groaned, I knew it would get me if I didn't do something. I reached beside the bed with a shaky hand and found the baseball bat that I had leaned there. I had been practicing. Baseball tryouts would start soon, but it was not what I imagined I'd be using it for. I took it up, leaned down, and swung at the hand with all my might. It didn't stop right away, but after a few more hard shots, it pulled its fingers back under the boards. They were probably broken, at least I hoped they were, and as I clutched the bat, I waited for them to come back again. I sat there for a while, just staring at the floor, as I watched something worse than a finger look back at me. It was a single, bloodshot eye, and it looked very human. It locked eyes with me, and I pulled back into the bed, the bat clattering to the floor. My parents came quick when I started screaming. I tried to explain it to them, tried to tell them what I had seen, but they just thought I'd been having a nightmare. Finally, they allowed me to sleep with them in the loft, and until we went home, that was where I slept. I refused to be in that room by myself, even during the day, and I wasn't bothered again that time. It wasn't the last time I saw that mad eye, though, or heard the scrabbling of all those fingers. We didn't go back the next year. Dad couldn't get his time off approved or something, and when they planned a week-long trip when I was 12, I tried to get out of it. I still had nightmares sometimes about those eyes and fingers, and I didn't want to go back. I was 12, old enough to be by myself, and if my sister hadn't tried to do the same thing, I think I'd have managed it. I even promised her that she could have my room, but she was not going for it. Mom put her foot down and said none of us were staying home, and we would all be going, and that would be that. I packed my bat, as well as a flashlight, and we set out for the lake house on the second week of July. I tried my best to wear myself out that first day. I swam for hours. I explored and hiked, and by the time night fell, I was nodding off at the dinner table. I'd run myself ragged, and I was hoping that if I didn't antagonize them, maybe they would leave me alone. By the time it was late enough to head for bed, I fell onto the little mattress and was out before my head hit the pillow. I thought I had managed it, that I had finally gotten to sleep before the scratching could start, and I slipped off as I thought that I might have finally broken the cycle. When the scratching woke me up in the wee hours, I cursed and smacked my pillow as I sat up. It was louder than ever. It sounded like an animal's claws, like nails on a chalkboard, and as I peeked over the edge of the bed, I could see something as it moved beneath the boards. It was pushing again, thrusting its fingers between the wooden slats, and when the fingertips began coming through, I felt like I was having the nightmares all over again. It pushed at the boards, warping them, bending them in odd ways, and I felt certain that it would come through the floor at any minute. Some of the fingers were bent in odd ways, the tips looking like they might have healed after I had broken them, and as I took up the bat again, I prepared to give them something to heal from again. I smashed those fingers as they tried to poke free, and as the blood ran down, they pulled them back, and the eye came back to stare at me. It was bloodshot and awful, and when I hit the floorboards, it moved away as I was left in silence. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind, every scrape of a tree branch, every groan of the wood that sounded like the scraping as it returned. I finally fell asleep, but it was nearly morning, and I woke up tired and groggy. I was pokey the rest of the day. My mom asked if I was feeling sick, but I assured her that I was fine. I did take a nap later, though. I wanted to be on my game when it came back that night. But I got more than I bargained for. As I sat in the middle of my bed, bat in hand and fighting sleep, I began to hear a scrabbling like I had never heard before. It was as if a beast with 1,000 fingers was crawling down there, and as it moved, it dug its nails in deep. The boards began to buck and bulge, a multitude of fingers scrabbling at the wood, and when they began to poke through, there was no way I could get them all. I swung my bat again and again, smashing fingers and breaking nails, but it was like an army was underneath the floorboards. I kept hitting them again and again, their digits snapping loudly, but the wood was starting to come up. I screamed, not for anyone, but just in general, and as they started to press up and into my room, I caught a glimpse of what was beneath. I wanted to scream, but it was stuck in my throat. I had thought it was rats at first, but then I thought maybe it was just a single person. But as I saw the eyes that looked up from the floor, I didn't know what to think. It was people, naked, skeletal thin, all of them trying to come up and out of the area beneath the floor. I counted 4, then 5, then maybe a dozen, and they were trying to pry up the floorboards. Their numbers just kept growing. How many were there under the floor? I pictured ants coming out of a hill, and the idea of that many half-starved humans pressed beneath our summer cabin made my skin crawl. I heard loud footsteps coming towards my room, and suddenly the door opened and the hall light spilled in. I thought there might be as many as a dozen. They looked up as the door came open, their eyes looking surprised as they saw him. I was shocked too, but my shock was twinged with hope as someone came to save me at long last. "What in the hell are you?" But Dad stopped as he saw what was under the floor. They saw him too, and they tried to get through the floor, but he didn't give them time. He stepped in, grabbed me, and stepped out, closing the door and putting a chair under it from the hallway. Then he woke up my sisters and took all of us up to the loft as he called the police. Then he sat up there with a pistol, something I didn't even know he owned until that moment, and waited for the police to arrive or some of the people from the floor to come out. When the police arrived, he came down to let them in, and then he came back to keep us safe. That was my dad, always a protector. Cops didn't find anything, but the pushed-up floorboards kind of helped our story. I told them how long it had been going on, what I had heard and seen, and they searched under the house and in the nearby woods before finally giving up. They found sign in the house of something moving around down there, even a screen on the side of the house that had been jimmied open, but they didn't find much else. Dad didn't tell me till I was older, but apparently the sheriff who came out to check the scene had told him a story. The lake house was so cheap enough that a working stiff like my dad could afford it because it was the site of something terrible. The last owner had gone missing suddenly. A man, a woman, 3 children, and none of them had ever been found again. They'd searched everywhere, but found neither hide nor hair of them. The only thing they did find was a pushed-up board in the room that I now stayed in. Enough boards for a small horde to squeeze in through. My parents sold the lake house after that, and we got a timeshare in North Carolina. That was a decade ago. but I still have nightmares about the people under the cabin sometimes. So if you see a cabin for sale on Lake Erie, be very cautious and do your homework. There could be more in the foundation than just the termites.
Makes you think about putting down new flooring, doesn't it? Maybe just filling in the whole underside of your house with concrete. Our next story is about a couple of movers who go in to have a look at what a hoarder has left behind. It's what they find while they're there, though, that's truly interesting. So let's hear a little more about the glowing tunnel.
My brother and I work for a cleaning company in our hometown. We're both still in high school. He's a junior and I'm a senior. So it was either this or fast food. The owner is a friend of Dad's. We'll call him Chuck to protect the innocent. Chuck's a nice enough guy. My brother and I have known him since we were young, but he leaves a lot to be desired as a businessman. Don't misunderstand. The guy makes money, but he seems to think that employee safety comes after profit. My brother and I worked like dogs for him all summer, cleaning out people's yards and moving boxes out of abandoned houses. Anything to make a buck, I guess. It was nearly July when Chuck got a call from another of his old friends, Philip O'Dare. If Chuck is a little underhanded in his business practices, then Philip is a goddamn pirate. He's the town's #1 real estate agent, and I mean everything when I say that he sells everything. He owns a pawn shop, Broke Brokers, with his younger brother. When he wasn't out selling houses, he was looking for homes to buy. The homes he picks up are rough, most of the time. If he were selling them a fixer-upper, that would be okay. The problem is that after he picks up these houses for next to nothing, he does shoddy Band-Aid repairs on them. Then he sells them for top prices, usually to pick them back up a few years later when the occupants move out in disgust. My current situation is thanks in part to Philip's underhanded renovations and Chuck's less than stellar business sense. The Foskey place? I asked. I didn't even know Mr. Foskey was dead. Chuck looked up from his notepad, his gray hair making him look like a cloud with glasses. He's not. Foskey's son sent him to Golden View and sold his house to O'Dare Real Estate. That made me a little sad. Mr. Foskey had been my English teacher when I was in middle school, and he had also taught Dad when he was in 8th grade. My brother had not been what you would call an advanced English compatible student, so he didn't get him. But Dad and I both agreed that Mr. Foskey was the best. He always had such cool lesson plans and exciting books in his class library. He challenged his advanced students to be more than a title and wanted us to be more than just A-plus students. I was sad to hear that he had been fired a couple of years ago. He had started to get a little senile in his old age. Everyone said so. And his taste in books had always been a little esoteric. After he'd been fired, he'd become a hermit. He only came out at night, and the word around town was that he'd been going through people's garbage. What he sought was anyone's guess, but people came to visit him and said his house was full of junk. Now he was gone, off to the mental hospital in the next town, and we were left to clean up his house. Phil says to save anything that looks valuable. Apparently the guy had a ton of old books that were probably worth money. Foskey's son sold Phil the house and everything in it, so don't bother saving anything sentimental. A couple of weeks in the puzzle factory and the old man probably won't even remember his own name. I left before I could say anything stupid. The thought of a brilliant man like Mr. Foskey losing his mind in a place like Golden View made me sick at the time. Now, I think it might be exactly what he deserves. We arrived at 6 a.m. Philip was waiting for us, a cell phone against his ear and a latte in his other hand. He was dressed in his usual blue suit, and I imagine we looked pretty shabby next to him in our jeans and black t-shirts with the company name on them. My brother had rolled the sleeves up on his motorcycle boots peeking out from beneath the cuffs of his new jeans. He was going through some kind of James Dean phase, but it really just made him look like an extra in Grease. We waited for Philip to finish, and when he did, he looked at us like we were in the way. "Well, what are you waiting for?" "A breakdown on what exactly we're doing," I said a little hotly. "I thought you boys were smart. Clean the damn house and save what can be sold. Old bastard bought the house 5 years ago after his kids moved out.
It's a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, and I have a client who wants to see it Wednesday. So if you could not take all week about it, that would be great. We'll take a look and let you know by the end of the day, okay? He scoffed again, clearly saving all that charm for his clients. Just have it done. I'll pay you double if you can finish it by Wednesday. You, not your boss. That was a tempting offer. Chuck was great, but he tended to be a little tight with the checks. We were being paid under the table, so we couldn't really argue. But some extra cash would be sweet. I shook Philip's hand, and he said to have it done by Wednesday. He nodded and left, the sound of his T-bird cutting up the road as he went. I immediately regretted my words when I saw inside the house. The house had a strange floor plan. There was a living room, a dining room with a bar that overlooked from the kitchen. Off the kitchen was a bathroom, and a door to get out back where you could sit in a small backyard. Off the living room was another door that I guessed was to the bedroom. The house had a strange sort of feel to it when you came inside, and I could believe that such a place would draw Mr. Foskey to it. It was eccentric in a practical way, a way that he would have understood. The living room dining room was full of trash and furniture, stuff floor to ceiling, and I could see a little walkway from the living room to the kitchen. The kitchen was spared the worst of it, but it was still covered in garbage. The floor was a solid foot of garbage, the cabinets were covered in old food wrappers, and the refrigerator seemed clean, though it wouldn't open due to the junk on the floor. The cabinets were stuffed with garbage, and I sighed as I thought about the job at hand. This looked like a good week's worth of work between the living room and the kitchen alone. I'll take the kitchen, you take the living room. Whoever finishes first will help the other. Why do you get the kitchen? I rolled my eyes at him. I see a lot of furniture in there, football star. You got Dad's build, so you do the heavy lifting. Guess that means you got Mom's build, so I guess you can get your bitch ass in the kitchen, he said with a laugh. We put on our respirators, rubber boots, and thick gloves. We hadn't seen anything that would make us break out the hazmat suits yet, but I like to be safe. We were definitely working with some old refuse, possibly refuse that had been outside, which meant that rodents were a danger, as well as insects. We were cleaning out a shed like this not even a month ago, and ran upon a secret hornet's nest. That had made us wary about attacking big mounds of trash, so I was careful to look where I was putting my hands as I started in the kitchen. I got lucky. The trash was mostly dry and clean, and it was easily bagged up. I heard my brother straining and grunting in the living room, and I looked out to see him wrestling with a sizable piece of furniture. He was dragging it out onto the lawn. Philip had a mobile storage unit pointing out front, and then loading them into the unit. I watched him groan as he tried to lift an antique dining room table, which had been the linchpin on a large pile of garbage before going to help him. The pile fell over as we freed the table, and I helped him lug it out onto the yard. This is how we spent our first day, at least till mid-afternoon. By 4, I had all the garbage out of the kitchen. My brother had gotten most of the furniture out of the living room, and was wiping sweat off his brow as he stuffed papers into a bag. Doesn't this guy have AC? I haven't seen a thermostat. Maybe it's in the bedroom. My brother stood up and walked to the door, coming off the living room. As he opened it, I heard him whistle and came to see what he had found. Inside the bedroom was a tunnel of solid junk. It snaked to the left, getting dim inside, and the tunnel looked as though someone had cut it out of solid junk. You sure you want to go in there? I asked. He just rolled his eyes and took a pen light out of his pocket. This shouldn't take long, he said as he tromped into the room. I stood for a few seconds, making sure the whole pile wouldn't just fall over, and went back to work in the kitchen. I should have gone with him, maybe been a little more attentive, but I was in a hurry and really wanted to have a look at the bathroom before quitting time. I got all the garbage bags out of the cabinets, stuffed 6 bags with nothing but trash. I unearthed the sink and the microwave and had started cleaning the countertops when I noticed something wasn't right. The trash was still in the same place my brother had left it, and the door to the bedroom still hung open. Was he still in there? There was no way it had taken him an hour to navigate the bedroom and find the thermostat. I called his name into the bedroom. The name almost seemed to echo down the trash hall, but there was no answer. It was starting to get close to sunset, and I really wanted to be out of here before dark. Thinking maybe he had fallen or gotten hurt in there, I grabbed a headlamp and headed into the trash maze. I turned the corner and was bombarded by the claustrophobia of the trash tunnel. The tunnel was a solid mass of trash that seemed almost sculpted. It was like someone had built a wall out of mortar and trash and then cut a tunnel out of it. There was a soft light coming from the garbage wall, and when I turned off my headlamp, I found I could see. The dim light seemed to be coming from something inside the wall,
but even with the headlamp on, I couldn't tell what it was. It made navigating the strange, winding maze a little easier, but the size started to unsettle me as I moved. The bedroom was supposedly 12 by 12, but this maze seemed to be winding on farther than the whole house. I'd been taking turns for several minutes when I came upon the first strange sight. Coming around a bend, I came face to face with a small library. A small grotto held 4 bookcases, stuffed with old-looking books. Many of them were covered in mold, and as I got close, I could see bugs moving across them. I backed away and kept walking, not sure how deep this rabbit hole went, but wanting to be out more and more with every step. I kept looking down periodically, seeing if I could see a print from my brother's big rubber boots in the dust. I was looking for any sign that he had passed this way, but I was coming up with nothing so far. Then I came upon the old man. I turned a corner and found myself in a 10 by 10 park with honest-to-God grass. There was a lamppost that spilled light over the old park bench, and an old man sat on it, feeding real pigeons. As I approached, he patted the bench as though he wanted me to sit. One look at the old man told me that I did not want to sit there. He was dressed in a long coat that looked patched and frayed, a fuzzy old cap obscuring his face. He patted the seat again as I approached, but I had already decided that I would not be stopping. The whole situation was a little creepy, and I intended to just walk on and continue on my way. When his hand shot out and grabbed me, I nearly jumped a foot. His hand was covered in thick green mold, and when he looked up, I could see the same mold growing on his face. He grinned his gap-toothed smile at me, and for a moment, I thought it was Mr. Foskey. His grip was firm, but moist, and when I pulled away, his hand slipped off, and he sat there, grinning at me. Something clamped down on my ankle then, and I looked down to see that he was feeding rats. These were wharf rats, too, no cute pet shop mice, and as they tried to scuttle up my rubber boot, I kicked out at them and turned to run. The old man was standing then, a creaky moan coming from his dusty throat, but I was out of the park and into the tunnel again. I ran, flat out, and as I ran, I imagined I could see lights in the wall reaching out for me. Their brightness came reaching out towards me, and I ducked away from them as I came. The tunnel seemed to be nightmarishly claustrophobic as I ran, and I began taking turns at random. I had no idea where I was or where I was going. I only knew that I wanted to be out. I prayed that this tunnel would end, and I would just flop out onto the carpet in the dirty living room, that my brother would be waiting there for me. He would wonder where I had been and what had taken me so long, and we would leave and never come back to this place. Screw O'Dare, and screw his money too. As I stopped panting, clutching the stitch in my side, I just wanted to be out. That's when I heard the footsteps. They echoed strangely up the tunnel, and they filled me with a deep sense of dread. Was it the old man coming after me? Some new horror? I didn't know, but the steps were heavy and ominous, and I knew that I did not want them to find me. I hid around the corner in a little trash alcove and shuddered in my cowardice. The steps grew closer. I was shaking all over. The footsteps were slow and knowing. I just knew it was some kind of new monster that wanted me. It was some mold monster that was trying to invade me like it had invaded the old man. It was the old man who wanted to breathe spores into me and infect me. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't care. At that moment, I just wanted to leave, and I was willing to kill to get out of here. Clump, clump, clump. I saw a rock on the ground. Clump, clump, clump. It looked jagged, broken like a paving stone. Clump, clump, clump. I picked it up and held it against my chest. Clump, clump, clump. I closed my eyes and steeled myself for what I was about to do. Clump, 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 clump. I rounded the corner and swung the stone, and it connected with something that immediately staggered back, bellowing. I swung it again, but it hit me around the waist and drove me to the ground. I dropped the rock in the skirmish, and as it rolled away, I felt hands close around my throat. It was choking me, choking the life out of me, and as I groped around, I could see little black swirls at the corners of my vision. I swung my fist out at it, but without oxygen, it was a weak swing at best. I went back to groping, trying to find something, and finally, my hands settled on something hard and jagged. I grabbed the rock and swung it, filling my lungs with air as the hands loosened, and the shape fell away. I lifted the rock and swung it down at the shape, hitting it in the head. I straddled it, swinging it again and again and again until it finally stopped moving. I was panting then, out of breath, covered in sweat, but I felt my breath escape in a sudden whoosh when I flipped on the headlamp. I was choking again. I could not find any air. I was straddling a human being, his face mostly caved in, but the rolled-up shirt sleeves were a dead giveaway. He was wearing our shirt, the shirt with the two happy moving men on the front, and as I threw the rock away, the tears began to flow. I jumped off him and ran, leaving him in the tunnel to God only knows what. I ran in a blind panic. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, and I just kept running. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs heaved. I bumped into the walls and saw them crumble around me. As they fell, I felt the trap envelop me. I embraced the entombing refuse as my fate. I had killed my brother. I deserved to be encased in garbage for all eternity. I deserved it. I deserved it. I could see flashing lights and was aware of being carried. I opened my eyes to see two paramedics rolling me into an ambulance. Chuck was following behind them, clearly panicked. Philip was there too, but he looked more aggravated than worried. As we drove away in the ambulance, I looked around. They seemed to become aware that I wasn't unconscious. What happened? I asked, and the two of them filled me in. Philip had come out after dark to check on our progress. After finding the house mostly still cluttered, he had called Chuck and told him to get down there. The house was still a disaster, and his workers were nowhere to be found. When Chuck arrived, they found me passed out in the living room under a pile of garbage. They had called the paramedics, fearing I had broken my neck, and had then come to check me out. "Tera says you're lucky to be alive, honestly," said Chuck. Philip elbowed him, wanting him to shut up. "Why?" I asked. He said the whole place was crawling with black mold. It was around the crown of the ceiling, the baseboards. Hell, the whole place was ate up. It's a good thing your brother left early, eh? I told Chuck I didn't remember him leaving. I told him about the bedroom, the tunnel, the strange things I'd seen there. I don't think Chuck believed me, but they did go back to the house to look for him. They came to see me in the hospital later that night, told me they hadn't seen a hide nor hair of him. He wasn't at home. They had called Dad, and his truck was still at Chuck's place. They didn't know where he was, but they were sure he would turn up. I didn't answer that. A week later, they let me go, and I went back to the house. It's still a mess. The guys Philip got to clean it aren't as diligent as my brother and I, but they're great at leaving doors unlocked. I stood before the bedroom door like I expected it to open on its own and suck me in. It didn't, and when I finally opened it, I found not a tunnel, but a cluttered bedroom on the other side. Just a bedroom. No tunnel, no monsters, just a regular old bedroom. It's been 2 weeks, and no one's seen my brother. He's lying dead in some weird trash tunnel with his head caved in. A part of me knows this, but a part of me also knows that there is no trash tunnel behind that door. I don't know what to do. Dad is getting worried. The police have no leads, and I can't find the tunnel. I killed him. It's my fault. But if I tell people the story, they're going to lock me up in Goldenview right along with Mr. Foskey. I went to visit him a few days ago. No one's monitoring who visits the residence at Goldenview. When I asked him about the trash tunnel and the glowing mold, he just stared at me blankly. I begged him to tell me, screamed at him to help me find my brother, but whatever light was in Mr. Foskey when I was in his English class is gone now. Now he just sits in the day room and watches soap operas with the rest of them. I don't know what to do. How do I get my brother back? What will happen to whatever poor sap buys the house next when they open that door? Will they find their familiar bedroom? Or will they be the next victim of the glowing tunnel?
Maybe that's why you see so many people hoarding junk. Maybe they're hoping for their own escape to whatever it is that the glowing tunnel creates. Our next story is about a pair of new homeowners doing some renovations when they discover something left behind by an old tenant. Let's hear a little more about Burbles from Beyond.
We recently moved into our new house. It's perfect, just the right size for our family, but it has a strange problem with the drains. I noticed it while I was unpacking the bathroom things. I turned to discover that my husband hadn't flushed and pushed the lever to send it down the drain. When I did, I discovered that the sinks burble whenever you flush the toilet. Nothing too jarring, but it scared me a little when I first heard it. The sink burbled and bubbled, making a noise deep in the drain as it cleared the water. My husband laughed it off when I mentioned it to him. "It's an old house, dear. The pipes are on the central line that feeds into the septic tank. No one has used them in a while, so it's probably just getting used to people being here again." I blew it off as a weird thing the house did and just went about my business. A week later, the drain started burbling when I took a shower, too. I overlooked it, though, not wanting to dwell on something I ultimately couldn't do anything about. This was the first place I'd lived with a septic tank. I'd always used city water, and I figured it was just something that happened when you used a septic tank. My husband barely seemed to notice it, so I assumed it was nothing out of the ordinary. After a few weeks, I'd almost come to ignore it, until the whispering started. I was brushing my teeth one night, running the water as I always did, when I heard the burbling coming from the drain again. I had bent my mouth to the stream to get a mouthful of water, when I could have sworn I heard a burbling kind of whisper coming from the drain. It was barely audible, more like a gurgle than a burble, but as I listened, it almost sounded like words. Black bank bees. Back bank bees. I turned off the water, spitting my mouth full of paste down the drain, and closed the door behind me. The burbling got worse from there on out. It didn't just bubble when the water was on. It always bubbled, loud and jarring, and I was still certain I could hear some kind of whispering. My husband just shrugged it off as normal. He was busy with work and didn't have time to indulge his flighty wife. I put up with it as best I could, but it was honestly starting to grate on my nerves a bit. I heard it in the kitchen, the living room, and especially whenever I had to go to the bathroom. The bathroom seemed to be the epicenter, and as the days progressed, I became more and more confident I could hear words amidst the gurgles. I lost my cool one night when my husband was working late. As I lay in bed, my son sleeping soundly next to me, I could hear the sink burbling and whispering from the hall bathroom. The bubbles were visible now when it burbled, deep green bubbles that sloshed up the drain and filled the sink with a stagnant water smell. Never when my husband was at home, of course, and the bastard didn't believe me when I showed him the thin film that hung on the bowl. As I lay there listening, the gurgling seemed to mock me. It seemed like only I could hear it, and the continued surge of tidal force had frazzled me. I was up before I knew what I was doing. I stomped down the hall in my pajamas, heading for the bathroom on bare feet. I was mad. I'd had enough of it, and I slammed the door open as I saw the towel rack shake ominously. I flipped on the lights like I was intending to catch the sink doing something wrong, and shouted loud enough to make my son stir and cry in his sleep. "Shut up! Shut up right now!" I screamed at the burbling sink. And, for a wonder, it did. The drain stopped burbling for a few seconds, and there was peace. Then a geyser erupted from the drain and splashed high enough to splatter the ceiling in a green fountain. It splattered the walls, pattered against the shower curtain, and caused the ceiling to rain drops of thick sludge. I'd fallen to my backside in the hallway, watching the geyser with wide eyes, when I saw something gloop out of the drain that made me scream. I scuttled across the floor, my back hitting the bedroom door, hearing my son cry out from the bedroom. I had seen the last thing I would have expected from the narrow bathroom drain, and I was certain now that I could hear something else joining it as it gurgled onto the bathroom floor. A hand of sludgy green liquid that had pushed its way up the drain like an angry hurricane. I reached with numb fingers for the knob, the fingers refusing to find purchase as I slapped at it uneasily. I heard a gurgling thunk then, the sound of water trying to maintain a shape it was unaccustomed to, and something cast a shadow against the door. The best way I can describe it is the shadow appeared to be cast by a living jello mold. It was solid, but not transparent. It cast a watery shadow, its form undulating as it came towards the door. A single green watery hand gripped the door frame. I screamed as it lumbered into the hallway, and my grasping hand felt like a dead fish. It was 6 feet tall, bulbous and amorphous, with a shuddering bald head. Its eyes were murky green coals, and its form was a wiggling mass of barely contained fluid. The fluid was, well, it was awful. It had clearly drawn its matter from the septic tank, and the things floating within the water didn't bear thinking about. It took a single unsure step, the unstable golem shaking as it took another tottering step forward. My son was screaming now, unsure where I was, and his terror only amplified my fear. As it wobbled towards me, leaving puddles of oozing liquid on the floor, I heard the burbling voice again as it whisper-wailed its words. Beck, bank, bees. Beck, bank, bees. I tried again to open the door, my eyes locked in terror on this watery monstrosity. Beck, bank, bees. Beck, bank, bees. I felt my own water puddle on the floor as my bladder let go, the creature towering over me. Beck, bank, bees, it yelled. It leaned over me, and I could feel the stagnant drops fall onto my face. I wanted to cover my nose. It smelled like raw sewage, but I was too afraid to move. I was sure in that moment that I would never see my husband or my son again. He would return home to find me dead, maybe find our son dead too in his bed. He would see the water and always wonder what had happened to me. As this creature crouched over me, I was certain that the last thing I saw would be his terrible sewage form. It bent its watery lips to my face then, and when it whispered this time, I could hear something different. Check. Tank. Please. The words were spoken as though they might break the creature, and they were spoken with the utmost emphasis. His speech was slushy, slurry, as though his tongue was missing. He was approximating speech, but it was still difficult to make out. I looked into those green orbs and repeated back what he had said. Check, tank, please? It nodded its liquid head, its featureless face almost looking relieved. Then it melted into a deluge of stagnant water, and I was covered in buckets of disgusting sewage. My husband didn't believe me. I was still cleaning up sewage when he came home, and he was utterly flabbergasted. I told him about the creature, about its final message, but he refused to believe it. It was a dream, he said. The septic tank had backflowed into the house, and I had dreamed this watery creature. We went back and forth for hours, until finally I had the solution. Open up the septic tank, then. If there's nothing there, then I'll never say another word about it. I'll deal with the gurgles and the bubbles, and I'll never say another word about anything. After another hour of arguing, he finally relented. We called a service, and they breached the lid. It wasn't too hard. The earth was removed, and the lid was removed with a little backhoe. The smell was atrocious, but the men didn't seem to mind. My husband told them that we had a problem with the tank. It flowed into the house, and they figured the valve had been stuck. I saw the pumper hose descend, and the tank was emptied. My husband said I didn't need to be there for this, but I wanted to see. As the sewage went down, I saw the operator's eyes grow large. He called his partner over, and a flashlight was found. The flashlight nearly fell into the tank when it fell across the sewage-covered lump. His partner told us that it appeared to be something in the tank, but we shouldn't worry. The house has been empty for a while. It's probably just a congealed mass or something. The operator continued to pump the tank, and as the water level fell, we saw that the lump was more than a congealed mass of waste. It was a body. The police were called. Our front yard was soon playing host to 3 squad cars, a fire truck, and an ambulance. The techs were shunted aside as the rescue team received the body from the septic tank and loaded the remains into a body bag for identification. The police asked us some questions, but had already cleared us for the most part, since the body appeared to have been there for months. The inspector had likely not breached the tank at all during the initial inspection, so the body could have been there for years if it had been sealed properly. As the bag was zipped, I got a momentary glance at him. It was large, the head bald and lumpy. It looked a little like the sewage form that had tottered over me in the hallway. Before they zipped it up, the desiccated creature's mouth lolled open, and I felt a chill run down my spine. His tongue was mangled. Since the incident, we've heard no more burbling. The septic tank hasn't sputtered, and the house has been quiet since that night. Other than the sounds of our family, of course. My husband still can't explain how I knew there was a body in the tank, but I'm just glad that there was ultimately a happy ending to the story. So next time you hear a burbling in your pipes, don't discount it as simple plumbing issues. Your house may be hearing burbles from beyond.
sure you put a little more than Rid-X down your drain every month then. Maybe a little holy water to keep the boogans at bay there. This next story is about a contractor who's recently out of prison and looking for work. But I think he finds a little bit more than he's looking for when he discovers the black spot.
I won't go back to work tomorrow. I don't care what Jack says and how much he threatens to tell my probation officer. I will not hear the way my coworkers laugh at me. They tell me it's nothing, but they didn't see what I saw. They haven't seen the spot like I did today. Yeah, I did a little time. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not going to bullshit anybody and tell them a lie. I got a little too drunk one night and assaulted someone in a bar. It was my first offense, and I did my 2 years without much hassle. Hell, they even let me do the last year at work release, so I could keep paying my parents' mortgage for them. I have experience in construction, so it was a good fit. They set me up with a crew, doing drywall and laying flooring, and I worked for a good bunch of guys. It was a sweet gig, and it was a gig I was told I could keep after I got released. On the day I was released, I told them I'd see them in a few days and rejoin the real world. That, however, was the night my dad suffered a stroke. It was a bad one. Mom woke me up screaming, and we took him to the hospital in the back of an ambulance. Suddenly there were doctors to talk to, changes to make to the house I'd grown up in, and a man who'd once taken care of me to take care of. He'd lost function in nearly half his body, and with Mom feeling very overwhelmed, it became my job to take care of Dad. It wasn't until my probation officer informed me that I was in danger of violating my probation that I realized it had been almost a month since I'd been released. I understand that you've got some things going on, but you have to maintain employment as part of your probation. Your job with a construction firm says that they'll let you come back if you're still interested, but you have to have some income coming in by next week or risk violating your probation and going back to prison. I went to the foreman the next day to see if I could get my old job back, but it appeared I was in for a surprise. Yeah, sorry, we filled your spot on that crew. We didn't know if you were coming back, and we needed a full crew for the job. I gritted my teeth and resist the urge to rage at him. Then why did you tell the probation officer I could come back? 'Cause I have a new crew for you, if you're still interested in it. I told him I was, and he gave me a number to call. That's Jack. He's been begging for another able body. Give him a call and see if you guys can meet up today. I thanked him, inwardly fuming that he'd already filled my position, and called the number. Jack answered on the third ring and told me that his crew left at 5 a.m. If I wanted a spot on it, I'd better be on the yard at 5 a.m., ready to work. I told him I would, and he hung up on me mid-sentence. I already didn't have a good feeling about this guy. He was terse, and didn't sound like the kind of guy you wanted to have a beer with after work. Regardless, I needed the work, so I set my alarm the night before and dragged up before dawn to meet this asshole at the yard at 5 a.m. And oh boy, had I been right in my hunch about this guy. Jack was one of those average-sized dudes who thinks he's a giant, the kind of guy who gets his ass beat in prison. He wore jeans and a sleeveless t-shirt, with a gold chain that hung down into his thick chest hair. His hair was held in place with enough grease to change the oil in my car, and I saw him single me out the second I showed up. He had a small crew, maybe 10 guys, but the way he zoned in on me let me know that he'd been looking for me. Well, you actually showed up. Rick may speak highly of you, but I'm not just going to drop somebody down so some ex-con can have a job. You'll be cleaning the job site until I'm convinced that you're not going to show up high or just dip out in the middle of the day. If that's not okay with you, then you're going to go tell your probation officer to send you back where you came from. He turned and walked away, the crew piling into his truck as I stood there in stunned silence. I had to remind myself that I needed this job as I piled into the back of the truck with them. I had to remind myself a lot over the next few hours that Mom and Dad needed me home and not back in prison. We pulled up outside this dumpy-looking house in the suburbs just as the sun started to come up over the horizon. It was an old 2-story with a peeling exterior, and a yard that looked like it had last been mowed during the Bush administration. They had made a pathway up to the walk so that they could bring in their tools, and the grass looked stomped flat by the constant traffic. They had set up a generator near the porch, and a big metal dumpster created an island in the grass where they had just rolled it off and dropped it. All in all, it was a sloppy-looking sight, but I was in no position to throw stones. Jack collected us up on the porch so he could give out assignments. The old house was being renovated so the company could flip it, and he set several of us to ripping up carpet. After assignments were given, Jack and 3 others went upstairs to assess the damage, and I didn't see them come back until after lunch. I was set to pulling carpet in the downstairs living room. It was a dingy little room with a pair of small windows that reminded me of eyes. The carpet was disgusting, covered in hair and crumbs, and it was tacky like old soda had been spilled on it. I was sliding on my gloves when someone threw a crowbar on the floor and walked off. "Hey, aren't you going to help me?" I asked, but the guy who tossed the crowbar just shook his head. "We each get a room. This one's yours, so get to it." Then they left me to pull carpet in this big dirty room by myself. The living room wasn't huge, but it was still a lot to ask of one person. I pressed the crowbar in and pulled the carpet away from the wall, not bothering to be gentle. The drywall was going to be pulled out next, and I suddenly wondered why they were pulling the carpet out first. I shrugged. I wasn't the boss here, so I guess I'd just have to do as I was told. That was the first time I noticed the spot. It was in the corner of the living room, a big water stain that seemed to take up 2 walls. It was about the size of a basketball, and the water spot looked like it would be wet if you touched it. It kind of freaked me out, for some reason, though I couldn't tell you why at the time. As I worked, I could almost swear it was moving, just a little, and I got that feeling like eyes on the back of my neck. You know the feeling, the one that makes your hair prickle up, the one that makes you think you might be being watched. I tried not to let it bug me, but it was like I could feel that spot as I worked. The carpet didn't take too long. An hour later, I had rolled it up and was ready to haul it out. I looked around for help, but the others were still hard at it, or at least pretending to be. I could see 3 of them sitting around smoking or chatting for every one guy working. When I asked them to help me get the carpet out to the dumpster, they just scoffed and waved me off. I couldn't move it by myself, so I just left it in the living room and went to look for more carpet to pull. It seemed that my fellow workers weren't as diligent as I was, because there was still carpet in 3 rooms that seemed to need removing. I sighed. This was clearly going to be my life for a while, and I set to work pulling the carpet to get ready to haul it all out. As I worked in a bedroom, the wall painted off blue with stormy-looking clouds on it, I got the feeling that someone was watching me. I turned to the door, thinking maybe one of my coworkers had come to see who was making so much noise back here, but there was no one. I looked to the window, but it was so caked with dust that no one could have seen anything through it. I glanced over to the closet, thinking maybe someone was lurking in there, and that was when I saw the source of my discomfort. A basketball-shaped spot on the wall over the closet door. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. It was just a water spot. The house was probably full of them, and I just happened to have found one that looked exactly like the other one I had seen. I kept working, pulling up tack strips in places, but it still felt funny, like something was watching me. As the carpet rolled up, I began to push it towards the door, sending up puffs of smoke as it thumped over. As I pushed, I couldn't help but glance at that spot. It was still there, hanging over the closet door, seeming to watch me as I worked. I turned to look at it squarely and gasped as I noticed a large white hole in the middle of the spot, like an eye floating in a puddle. I ran out of the room then, bumping into another worker as I beat a hasty retreat. "There you are," he said tersely. "We've been looking for you. Come help us move this carpet." I was more than happy to oblige, anything to get out of that room, and we spent the rest of the morning hefting carpet. We pulled it to the dumpster, tossing it in haphazardly, and then assessed the work for tomorrow. As we broke for lunch, I had almost forgotten about the spot. People being around me made me feel a little crazy about being afraid of it, but as we worked, I could swear I saw it again and again. The walls were covered in stains. The pipes were likely bad, but this one was definitely the same spot. It had the same wobbly edges and deep black center as the one I'd seen the first time. The white circle was gone, though, but I still found myself looking for it when I was in a room. The guys on the crew must have noticed because they started making jokes about how prison had made me jumpy. "He's got to check all the corners when he comes in to make sure no booty bandits are lurking," a big, slovenly one in overalls would say, and they'd all laugh like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. If I didn't need this job so bad, I'd have made something of it. We moved upstairs eventually, finding 2 bedrooms and a bathroom that needed carpet or flooring removed. By 5 o'clock, we had all the carpet out of the house and in the dumpster out front. Jack came back in a truck, handing out paychecks and thanking the guys for their hard work. When he came to me, he handed me the check grudgingly, scowling the whole time and holding it when I tried to take it from him. "Tomorrow I expect some real work out of you, not just half-assing it like you did today." I took the check and walked off. I'd find my own way back. The next day was a little better. Drac said that the drywall would come next, and then he and his cronies disappeared out to the truck while the rest of us worked. We all started tearing out drywall, dust and nails flying, and I meant to swing my hammer into that spot extra hard when I saw it. To my disappointment, though, the spot never showed up. I'd seen it everywhere yesterday, seen it in every room at least once, but today it was absent. We spent the day tearing out drywall and cleaning up after ourselves. When 5 o'clock came, we packed up and went out to get paid. Today had been better. Nothing builds camaraderie like a little hard work, and I found myself joining in on the jokes and conversation that happened in the group. We were covered in drywall dust as we walked out that afternoon, laughing about how Tony had been scared by a rat when it burst out of the drywall in the laundry room. Jack looked at them coldly, affronted that they had accepted me so easily. He handed me my check in silence, and I piled into the back of the truck with the others this time. The next day was the last day I'd get to work with them. We spent that day hanging drywall downstairs. Between the 10 of us, we worked diligently and quickly. The drywall went up a sheet at a time, something I was pretty good at, and I was glad to see it covered the hollow studs and the newly blown-out insulation. We marked a few spots where the beams were rotten, but the pipes actually looked pretty good, as did the electrical. I began to wonder what had made the spots I kept seeing. They looked so wet, but I pushed it out of my mind as I worked beside my newfound companions. By 5 o'clock, we'd done most of the downstairs, and we'd have the rest finished by tomorrow so we could move upstairs. When I walked out onto the porch, though, I realized I'd forgotten something. I had rubbed at my wrist, looking for the reassuring feel of metal that had gotten me through 2 years in the can, but I found only bare skin. My heart skipped a beat. My dad's watch was gone. When I remembered that I had laid it on the counter, not wanting it damaged while I was working, I must have forgotten all about it in the bustle. I grabbed my check and turned to go back in the house, Jack scowling at me as I walked off. "We're leaving," he called to my back, but I waved him off. "If you're gone when I get back, I'll just find my own way." I wasn't about to leave my watch here overnight. I went to the kitchen and checked the counter, but there was nothing there. It was powdery with dust from today's work, and I thought I could see an indent where the watch had been. I checked underneath the counters and around the floor, but I couldn't find my watch. I began to look around, hoping it hadn't found its way into someone else's pocket. I walked through the rooms, looking into each of them, to see if I'd maybe left it there, and when I looked into the living room, I was rewarded for my effort. Sitting in the dead center of the debris-riddled floor was my missing watch. I took a step, but something brought me up short. A little tickle on the back of my head told me that it was a little too convenient. It was like a trap baited with something for an unlucky animal to blunder into. I shook it off. I wanted my watch, damn it, and I wasn't going to just abandon it because I had a hinky feeling. I bent down to get it, wrapping my fingers around the cold metal, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was pulsating, sludgy, something that I had seen soaking into the new drywall. I looked up exasperated, figuring that someone had put a nail through a pipe at some point today. But what I saw drew me up short. I was left half bent, filled with fear, as I saw the oozy black spot seething on the drywall. It was bigger than a basketball now, its inky depth seeming to beat like a heart. As I watched, I could see 2 white circles materializing out of the soup. They rolled around like lost eggs, and finally came to rest in the middle of the sludge. I wanted to run. I didn't want to see whatever was in that thing, but I was trapped like a deer in headlights. I felt my breath hitching in my chest, and could only wait for my legs to regain their strength. The white orbs rolled around in the soup and became eyes. They blinked at me, their centers trained on me as I bent there. All at once, a Cheshire cat smile floated under them as it beamed at me. I was stuck looking into that inky hole, the edges dribbling down the fresh drywall as it oozed and ran. Suddenly I was sure that part of that darkness was ahead with the eyes that were looking out at me from whatever inky void it inhabited, maybe with hands that wanted to pull me into that dark hole it inhabited. As if it had read my mind, I I saw dark hands grip the edges of the spot, trying to pull itself out and enter my world. It never lost eye contact as it pulled itself out, and I could see the vague outline of its head as it came free of the spot with that placental pop. It was all I needed to see. Suddenly my legs were moving in overtime, my heart was racing like a steam engine, and I was out the door and slamming it behind me before I could quite remember how I had gotten onto the porch. Even through the blood pounding in my ears and the rubber of my sneakers pounding on the wooden floor, something else dominated my hearing, and there was one sound that I would never forget. I may not be able to remember how I came to be on the porch, heaving and gasping for air, but I do remember the sound I heard just before I threw the door open and I was free. It was a plop and a splatter, similar to a bucket of paint being emptied on the ground. I ran home, calling Jack as I took off up the sidewalk. He picked up on the second ring. "I'm not coming back for you. I told you that I was..." "Jack, you gotta get somebody back to the site. Someone's there." "Who?" Jack asked, and I could hear his skepticism. "If this is some kind of goof, I don't get it." I told him how I'd gone back for my watch and I'd seen someone skulking about the site. I didn't tell him about the oozing hole in the wall. He'd see that. However, I did tell him that I had thought the guy might be on drugs, so he should probably be careful. He was banging his fists on the drywall, so I booked it, I finished, trying to keep it believable. The crew was just starting to warm up to me, and I didn't want them to think I was a nut job. "Jesus Christ, I thought you ex-cons were tough. I'll go have a look. You just stay home. I'll let you know what I find." That was hours ago. Since I got home, I've been in my room, waiting on Jack to call, and I decided to write this while I waited. When I opened my laptop, though, my desire to get this down became all the more prevalent. As I slid it open, I caught a glimpse behind me and realized that I'll be fortunate if I have time to finish this tale. I could see a basketball-sized hole reflected in the screen of my laptop. I got up and locked the door and moved my writing to the living room. I don't know if the locked door will stop whatever may come from that dribbling hole, but I know that it may give me enough time to finish this before it breaks the surface. Keep your eyes peeled for water spots. You never know what might come slipping out.
One more story for you, and I think I've got a pretty good one for us to end out on today. It's a story about someone who gets into an accident on a construction site and discovers a little something beyond the pale. Let's hear a story about sleeping with one eye open.
It was an accident. It could have happened to anyone, which makes me wonder why it had to happen to me. I've worked construction for years. I've never so much as gotten a deep cut or broke a bone. Bruises sometimes, minor cuts. Nothing that stopped me from coming in the next day, though. It was just a typical day, really. I was performing an inspection, chatting with a buddy on a side job, and listening to the sound of an active construction site as it thrummed around me. Insurance would try to prove that I hadn't been wearing my safety gear, but I had witnesses that could attest that I'd been wearing my goggles, my hard hat, and my OSHA-approved gear when it happened. The drug test they had submitted me to showed I had nothing stronger in my system than the bagel I'd had for breakfast. It wasn't the fault of anyone besides whoever attached the rebar to that girder, I suppose. Even then, it wasn't really the welder's fault. It had simply come loose and stood there, waiting for me to get careless. On that day, I turned suddenly as I was inspecting an area of the basement, when a jutting piece of rebar, which I had made note of 1,000 times, pierced my safety goggles and stabbed right into my left eye. The members of my crew found me on the floor of the basement as I started to scream. The piece of rebar had gone through my goggles due to a slight fracture in the lens. That, plus my forward momentum, had caused the lens to break and my eye to be punctured. The rebar, as it happens, had been covered in dust. The dust caused the cut to become infected with a virulent strain of bacteria and ultimately required the removal of my eye. I tell you all this to explain how I came to be in a hospital bed, minus an eye, and strapped to the bed as soon as I finish writing this, since they fear I might be a danger to myself. But that's getting a little ahead of the story, I guess. It started the first night after I lost my eye. I'd been rushed to the ER right away, and the prognosis had been bad almost at once. There was definitely damage. There was the virulent strain of bacteria in the wound that was reacting badly. It was decided that it would be best if the eye was removed immediately to save the rest of my face. They were keeping me overnight to monitor the wound, make sure they got all the bacteria out, make sure the wound was healing properly as well. I remember laying there before I drifted off, trying to come to terms with my new vision and wondering how different my life would be with only one eye. When I drifted off, I was suddenly greeted by something terrible. I was looking through a single eye, staring up at a red, unbroken sky the color of old flames. Long runners of fire, falling stars they looked like, were cascading down, and I could hear a thundering as my point of view shook with the near-constant vibration. I was low, making me think I was less than an inch tall, and though I could look around, I couldn't move. Things were moving around me, though, creatures of perverted geometry. They lumbered about as though every step pained them greatly. As I watched them, something long and spidery, like a needle with wings, descended on me, its long proboscis growing as it landed astride my point of view. As the needle came down towards me, I woke up screaming. The nurses tried to calm me down, telling me I had just had a nightmare, and I tried to drift back off to sleep, visions of that smoldering place still in my head. The next time I closed my eyes, I was staring up at that crimson sky again. The fire was still raining down, but now I was staring at an absolute horror of a creature as it cocked its head in a nearly feline curiosity. It looked almost skeletal, like a Halloween decoration that moved a little too well. As I watched it, it scuttled a little closer, stalking my point of view. Its eye sockets were bare, I thought, but the closer it got, the better I could see a pair of bright yellow pinpricks in the depths of those cavernous sockets. Its ink-black tongue would flick out every now and again, so it could moisten its seemingly bony lips. It was skulking in on 6 strangely jointed legs, and it reminded me of Toothless from the How to Train Your Dragon movies. Well, Toothless's skeleton, at least. It cocked its head as it towered over me, but when it opened its mouth, I felt another scream break through my sleeping lips. Its mouth was like a garbage disposal full of teeth, 2 sets spinning in a circular buzzsaw pattern as it hissed and screamed at me. The screams could have broken glass, and my ears actually started bleeding as it screeched over me. The head snapped down, strange teeth covering my point of view, and I woke up to 2 orderlies restraining me. That's when someone stuck a needle in my neck, and I was left in a mercifully dreamless sleep. But dreams, it seems, were the least of my worries that night. I was treated to that same sky, that same damn amber sky, until the drugs wore off. In that time, I saw those lumbering giants make their way across the blasted land. I saw human beings, too, as they made their way across the blasted land, some of them trampled by the lumbering behemoths, or hunted and maimed by those skeletal horrors. Little burnt tan creatures, almost like frogs that had learned how to walk, capered about, shoving and kicking at the naked, stumbling humans that walked about confusedly. Their skin was seared, their bodies bleeding, but no matter what happened to them, they just kept screaming and writhing in endless pain. The vision went on and on, an endless hell that I was forced to watch as the world on the other side moved on. I don't know if it was heaven or hell, but the only thing that remained the same was the crimson sky and the burning rain. The rest of that day, I was kept in a medical-induced state, living in that hell and seeing its atrocities. In that time, it felt as though I slept for years. Time had no meaning in that place, and the lumbering beasts became a sort of rude clock for me. They would lumber by periodically, and I would mark that as an hour. Their footsteps would shake the ground, making my peripheral shudder, and my vision felt like ripples on a pond. Of the strange skeletal creatures, there was very little to see after the first one. None of them approached me again. The mosquito creatures kept their distance as well. I suppose they hadn't found me particularly tasty, so they were content to leave me alone. That was until one of the little brown creatures came to investigate. I'd been staring at that amber sky for 2 passes of the lumbering beasts when a face that only a mother could love swam up out of the void. It was so sudden that I yelped internally, not really sure what to do now that something living had come close again. Nothing had come to bother me for so long that I had begun to think my position was going to remain this dull little space until I eventually came out of this state. The ugly, lumpy creature bent down, bringing its face very close to my position, before wrapping a hand around me and bathing me in far too welcoming darkness. Light peeked through the fingers as we ran, but that seemed to be the point where the drugs were beginning to wear off, and I started to come out. I squinted my remaining eye at the heavy rays of the afternoon sun, and felt my stomach rumble at the tray that set before me. When the nurse came in, smiling, as she watched me eat, I asked her how long I had been out for. I expected it to be a week, maybe a month, but she told me it had been about 12 hours. It felt as though I had spent years in that terrible place, counted out days' worth of hours by the passing of the creatures, and I felt that I never wanted to go back there again. I wasn't sure if it was the act of sleeping or just the act of closing my eyes, but I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself from sleep. That wasn't particularly hard. I had been asleep for 12 straight hours. But as the night wound on, that feeling of heavy eyelids became harder and harder to ignore. The TV shows became a little less stimulating, the bed became a little more comfortable, and my head began to dip and slide towards my chest. They wouldn't let me have any coffee for some reason, no stimulants at all, and the water was cutting it not at all. I made it till just after sunrise, somehow, but as I slipped into unconsciousness, I was greeted with something worse than I could have ever imagined. As I slipped off, I was treated to the worst vision yet. I was sitting high up now, in a throne room straight from the mind of Wes Craven. When they speak of otherworldly geometry and Lovecraft, I have to believe they've seen this place. Nothing was equal, nothing congruent. The angles hurt to look at. The edges were like razor blades, and the building was either made by a madman or someone who was driven mad by its construction. When you read this, you won't understand, but I ask you to try. The room looked like it was designed to inspire anxiety, foster nightmares, put the inhabitants on edge until madness swallowed them whole. The whole room was a dirty white. It wasn't off-white. It wasn't a dark white. It was a filthy white. I had seen the way windows look when they're caked with mud, and that was this color. It made my skin crawl, or it would have if I'd had any skin at that moment. The color was throughout. The feeling it gave me, coupled with the anxiety from the construction I was now inside of, made me want to shudder and vomit at the same time. It was filled with pews, which were piled with the muddy frog creatures I'd seen before. They were all manner of sizes, their lumpy bodies pressed into those seats as they sat there in rapture of me, it seemed. They were dressed strangely in garments I can only describe as fancy rags, and as I watched, the show began. A line of naked, screaming people were dragged forward, unclothed brown creatures prodding them with sticks as they looked at me in horror. These people were in terrible shape. The best among them were bruised and dirty, but some of them were lucky to be standing. I could see bodies burned down to the white meat, bones poking from them, eyes and limbs missing. But the most horrifying part was how these injuries didn't seem to bother them. They were filthy and afraid, but I got the feeling that their injuries were secondary in their mind. As the first one was pushed towards me, the brown creature opened its mouth and spoke with a voice like a well filled with water. "We have rounded up these cattle for punishment, my lord." I was confused as the dark-haired man who was roughly my age stumbled forward, but I wouldn't have long to revel in that lack of knowledge. "Who dares to trespass within my realm?" I heard it, and turned, though I had no body. I was held aloft on a pedestal, and the creature beside me seemed to be my captor. It was beyond all earthly description, but I will try. Imagine one of those Jim Henson Skeksis had all the skin burned off of it, down to the bone, and then had the flesh reapplied badly with red and brown Play-Doh. Its eyes were piss-yellow slits. Its jaws were beak-like and sharp-looking, and its flesh appeared to be oozing as it spoke in a thick, deep voice like a frog at the bottom of a ravine. It spoke to the brown creatures, telling them how they wanted the people tortured, and then, suddenly, it noticed me. Turning its head, it smiled as it saw me looking at it, and its pleasure was even worse than its anger somehow. "See what awaits you, human. Witness and despair." It croakingly hissed out these words at me. I came awake, screaming again, and thankfully, they didn't put me under this time. I've been in the restraints for 4 days now. They transferred me to a psychiatric ward, and the straps were to stop me from digging at my skin. I've been awake for 4 days, refusing to go to sleep because every time I nod off, I'm returned to that hateful place. I gaze upon that creature as he passes judgment, never sleeping, never leaving, and I wake up screaming. I've begged my doctors not to sedate me, but I think they will before long. I'm writing this under heavy supervision, trying to explain to my doctors since words seem to have failed me. I'm hoping he understands that, despite my state, I don't want to hurt myself. I've seen what lies beyond, and it's not something I'm in any hurry to get to. Good evening, my little creeperonis. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's reading. Oh, it's that time again. Time to thank our patrons. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks, Leslie. We couldn't do it without you. If you too would like to join Leslie in our Spooky Skeleton tier, come on down to Patreon and become a patron. We have several fun tiers that you might enjoy. Or just come back and listen every week. We do love an audience. And as always, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.
And just like that, our stories are at an end for another day. But don't worry, we'll be back very soon with more cozy horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.